Yesterday I was reading this document declassified by the CIA called the Adam and Eve story. And I think it's funny because if it didn't have any merit, I don't think the government would have any interest in this. And I'm not a big conspiracy person, but this particular document tells a different story about Adam and Eve than what's in any Bible I've ever read. And to me, I feel like there is some truth to it. Talks about how you have this Naga language, and I'll get back to that. But the Naga language was kind of like hieroglyphics, and you know how they say Moses wrote Genesis and the history and stuff like that. And then in the document, it was talking about later on, Ezra had to rewrite everything, and they misinterpreted this Naga language. And they were talking about how Moses had access to it because he was of, the royal court. So he had the same access that the priest had. But just because he had access to it didn't mean that he understood it. What he did was he applied his knowledge according to the culture that he was living in at the time. But this Naga language was talking about how the tree of knowledge was really a country, and the snake wrapped around it meant that it was surrounded by water. And this kind of makes sense because we know that there are snakes that go in water and stay in water, swim in water, and that this particular continent suffered from a devastation that caused it to disappear. And it makes sense because we have the myth of Atlantis. We have the myth of Lemuria. It was talking about how Easter Island went through something devastating where most of it, I guess, sunk into the sea. And how Adam and Eve had to leave that particular land. Now, what's interesting is it talks about how Eve was really the daughter of Adam, not the wife. And that with these hieroglyphics, there was another symbol indicating that there was another female that either went to sleep or died. And I think that's interesting. I don't, like that particular part, I don't know. But there's other stuff like with this Naga language and how it ties to the Bible, because if you look into the mythology of the Naga people, they were a snake race that lived in water and underground. And they were known as helping out human beings. They could take the shape of humans, or they could just be snake-like people, or they could be half human, half snake. And they could also procreate with humans. And in the story, it was talking about how when Adam and Eve got this knowledge, it was knowledge of their ancestry. So human beings descended from these Naga people. And it kind of makes sense because it talks about how we have the reptilian part of our brain, like in our anatomy. And they talk about these dead worlds in the Qliphoth and how it's underground. And if you look in the Bible, when Moses was talking to the burning bush and God supposedly told him that he was to represent him, Moses asked God how would he prove that he was representing him. And so God told him to turn the staff into a snake. Okay. Then later on in the desert, I think is in Numbers, when the people were being bitten by vipers, they had to look up to a snake on a cross in order to be healed. Also in Genesis, in the regular story, the snake was the one that opened the eyes of Adam and Eve. And so these Naga in the myth are helping out human beings. And it seems like the snake is always the one liberating human beings. However, modern day Christianity teaches us that the snake is the devil, to stay away from it. The snake is evil. But the myth, and this is interesting, when the vipers bit the people, the myth of the Naga shows that the Naga protected people from other dangerous snakes. So, I think there's a lot of merit to it. I think what happens is that the powers that be are trying to scare us away from our ancestors, because they talk about these reptilian people and how these reptilian people who are supposedly aliens eat people and are blood drinkers. And it may be true to some level, but I feel like, just like human beings, there are some good ones and some bad ones. And there may be more good ones than we think. And, they talk about there have been these meetings of Congress that talk about UAPs underneath the ocean. And, that's where the Nagas come from. They come from the water. So I feel like they're trying to make these reptilian beings seem kind of mysterious and scary, and trying to get us to react in a negative way towards these beings, which are ancestors, and may actually want to free us from whatever slavery is going on in society. And that's why that particular document that I read is probably classified. That's just my theory. So you're welcome to believe what you want to. I just wanted to share that with you. I thought it was interesting.